with that, we will call to order at 7:04. We do have a quorum here. So as we get ready to get started, anyone from the public for public engagement? Seeing none. Move along. Let's bring this over to the minutes themselves. The minutes are in the, I'll bring them up as well. We did get them, and we'll take a motion, and then we will have a discussion on the minutes themselves. Okay, so we have the minutes themselves for the last meeting. Tim, thank you very much for taking these minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
So moved.
So Anne's made the motion. Do we have a second? Who's going to be fast on the second?
I'll second that.
Joe's seconding it. Catherine, you've got it? Excellent. So with that, we've got the minutes themselves. They do have who was there, people who joined when meeting was called to order, that was held by Zoom, and the date. So it has the various information on it and discussion of the various items. Had the one roll call vote, which was unanimous on second page. Any feedback, any discussion on the minutes themselves? We only have one set of minutes for tonight. Okay, with that, we'll take a vote in the order in which the members appear on my screen. This will be by roll call. Joe?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes.
Catherine?
I'm going to abstain from this vote.
Okay. Anne?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Lucy?
Yes.
Eric?
I'm just watching a little of two of them.
Okay. Eric, do you have audio? Okay, we're not able to hear Eric at the moment, so he's going to be a present without being able to vote. With that, we have 1, 2, and I vote in the affirmative. We've got 5 in the affirmative, 1 abstention, 1 present. So minutes are approved. Excellent. Okay, with that, the big item for this evening is to review the bylaws that are proposed for the April 29th town meeting. So 3 weeks from tonight, 4 weeks from tonight, we're going to have a significant town meeting is, I think, a polite way of putting it. It's going to have a lot of items. We're going to, of course, discuss the budget. That's the first item that will come up. And in addition to that, there are a variety of different articles that will be on the town meeting. Normally, by the town charter, zoning articles and bylaw articles are supposed to be handled at the fall town meeting. It's not a requirement, it's just a suggestion. And apparently these are going to be handled this year at a bunch of them at the spring town meeting, which again, there's no requirement that bars it. It's just a suggestion of the purpose of the meetings themselves. So for this meeting, we happen to have 4 zoning articles that we will be discussing, 4 general bylaws as well. I do have a declination from Attorney Mullen. He wanted to be able to join us here. Unfortunately, he had another issue that came up, so he's not able to join us. So with that, Attorney Bobrowski, we are getting a little bit of feedback from you.
Sorry.
That's okay. That sounds like things might be printing.
I
So-
am printing some.
That would explain it. So the first thing that we have is the zoning article, and so we have 2 zoning articles. We've got for the MBTA Community Overlay District, one by the Planning Board and one by citizen petition. So these are very similar, but they're not the same. So first we'll go over the Planning Board and the planning board does have a map with it, and then I'll bring up the citizen petition. I did request a copy of these from the town administrator's office, so that's where these are coming from. It'll just be a moment. Okay. And Attorney Bobrowski, if you've got feedback on this, one of the questions that I am particularly curious about is the compatibility or incompatibility of the zoning articles in particular and the others, as they will affect the recodification project. So that is an area that your input is definitely needed for this. So the first one that we have up is one that we've discussed before, but this is the first time that we've gotten your direct full attention on the article itself. This is a proposed town meeting article. This one is proposed by the planning board as a result of a subcommittee that was also formed with the zoning board of appeals and other members to meet the requirement for the MBTA communities overlay district. And we have some members who were part of this, and then there's another version of this that has also been proposed as a citizen petition. So first we're going to do the planning board version. I will also bring up the map separately.
Well,
But first,
thank you, Mr. Chairman. My reaction is that, the numbering is going to have to be tweaked. As an overlay district, this would be, I would put it at the end of section 9. So I can't remember what the last one is in 9, but there are at least floodplain. I believe there's a wetlands protection. There's a couple of other ones as well. So it's just a simple matter of renumbering it. I'm not, the text of it is something that it's a different story altogether. There's only been, to my knowledge, there's only been, I would say, less than a half a dozen Section 3, 3A bylaws that have been put in front of the Attorney General because it's so early in the Springtown meeting season. Concord, my town, has this on the warrant for later this month. Lexington has adopted theirs, and it has been approved by the Attorney General. That's the one I'm most familiar with, and you can Google it in the Lexington bylaw. It's section I believe it's in section 7. It's section 7.5. They call it village and multifamily overlay districts. And it is adopted, one of the first purposes to comply with 40A, section 3A. And I think that the most interesting thing about it, in my opinion, is the conditional language that they've adopted in terms of the ultimate density that will be built out. So if you were to look at Lexington's, you'll see that it has an inclusionary housing section. But essentially what it says is that they're going to go for whatever they can get. And if DHCD determines in writing that the town has not shown that 15% is feasible, at least 10% is going to be required. So they predicated it upon DHCD's turning them down for 15% of the units being affordable. I've seen that in one or two of the other ones that have been adopted so far. Lexington's is actually, in the implementation stage. I'm working on a project on Waltham Street that is hopefully going to be in front of the planning board later this season, later this spring.
Okay, and I know that there was a request for this to be submitted to the Attorney General for effectively pre-approval for at least a preliminary examination, because the Attorney General did say that that they would review the proposals, but they did not give a time frame. And last I checked with Attorney Mullen, we had not heard back yet on this particular proposal.
Yeah, I think I remember sending you an email a couple, 3 months ago where they were offering to do that. Well, this is their really busy season, so good luck with that.
Dan, when
I
did you-
saw another bylaw from another town in which I can't remember the exact requirement. I sent it to Judy Barrett. You talk amongst yourselves while I look for my email to Judy here. But I had never seen it before, and I asked her what she thought. I think ultimately, the Chapter 48, Section 5 requirements are what are going to govern the procedural formalities of zoning.
Hey, Dan, when was the last you heard from Attorney Mullen on if this had been pre-approved by the Attorney General?
I had not heard that there was any feedback yet from the Attorney General on it.
Okay, I believe at the planning board meeting last Tuesday, EO reported this has been pre-approved by the Attorney General. The citizens petition has been submitted, but that one hasn't been reviewed yet.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I have to think that a pre-approval, quote unquote, by the AG's office is going to be with a reservation of rights. I don't think it's a final approval. In the case that I was most recently made aware of, which is from Saugus, the Saugus bylaw, the Saugus bylaw says that it doesn't take effect until EOHLC approves it. And one of the lawyers for the town contacted me and asked, have I seen something like that before? I contacted Judy Barrett, who some of you may know at Barrett Planning Group. She's a consultant for the state on these bylaws and their adoption. And her reaction was the same as mine, that Chapter 48, Section 5 doesn't mention anything about pre-approval by EOHLC in any way, shape, or form. And so therefore we thought it was probably not legal, not lawful. And I view EOHLC as sort of the same pre-approval that the AG would give to it. I wouldn't be surprised if the AG called EOHLC or
So
EOH.
HLC, who both bylaws were sent to. From the way I understand it, the pre-approval is to make sure that the map fits all the criteria that the state.
Yeah, and from what I understand, the map is an exercise in computer modeling. So, and there are so many consultants out there right now that are doing that specific task. So for example, I would have no way of knowing whether or not the mapping meets the modeling. That's such a specialized thing at this point that it's been turned over to a parcel full of consultants. I got an email from Sharon the other day. Their consultant was asking me to take a look at their bylaw, and I said I would look at it from a textual point of view, but I had no way to analyze whether or not they met the technical requirements.
So among the items that we discussed at a prior meeting was possibly some amendments to this bylaw. And to your point, we're looking for guidance. If there are some changes, I'll discuss a couple of the changes we had briefly discussed at the last time is possible amendments to this bylaw to potentially improve it. My understanding is that because there hasn't been a final approval, it's still going to go through a review cycle again, and none of the changes that I see us making would be substantive to affect the approval itself. So as an example, for the buffers themselves, it talks about the buffers, it'll be approved by the planning board, and there will need to be coordination between the planning board and the Board of Appeals, because the planning board is now going to be handling some of the items that have traditionally been handled by the Board of Appeals, and they could be on adjacent lots. Another discussion we had was the position relative to the principal street. The primary building should have its principal facade and entrance facing the principal street, except as set forth with respect to corner lots. And that's something that we discussed might be best off with some language tweaking, so that there can be a shift of a building where it may have a facade, but the principal entrance may not face the principal street. The principal entrance may actually face the parking lot behind the building. Attorney McGrail had actually brought up an example of a project where that was done in town very successfully, where it did have a facade on the street, but the primary entrance actually is to the side as opposed to on the principal street itself. It was just there was a false door, effectively. I think it was an actual door, but it wasn't it was not the principal entrance on the street side. And I don't think, from what you're saying, I'm not taking that as something that would likely affect the Attorney General's acceptance or declination of the bylaw. Is that safe from your experience? Is that safe?
Yeah, I think that's fair. But I'm pretty cautious about these things. I can't say that I've had the bandwidth to go deep into the development of these bylaws. On some of these programs over the last 35 years, I wrote the bylaw that the state ultimately put up on their screen as the model bylaw for everybody to use. But this one's way out of my league in terms of the technical aspects of it. So I don't think anything that you've just mentioned, Dan, would probably be an issue. But like any good lawyer where you're out of your bailiwick, I would want to run it in front of somebody like Judy Barrett. I mean, I don't think I've touched the budget for extracurricular activities yet in the recodification. It's a simple matter for me to send it to Judy and ask her to give me her very educated consultant's point of view, and then to have the reliance upon that person who's really, one of the top 3-5 people out there doing this.
Okay. So one of the other questions that I know we had at the last meeting where this was discussed in depth was what the ramifications would be if there is not a MBTA communities bylaw adopted by the town. So similar a situation we've seen in a couple of towns like Milton, and what the net effects of that are and the timing.
Well, Milton's made an aggressive stand against it, or at least some of the people in Milton have. So I think the Attorney General's more or less served notice based on what I'm reading this in the newspaper. And she's served notice to them that their discretionary funding may just go away. Whether or not it gets beyond that, I think that's actually the sanction that's built into the language of the law, that you're ineligible for discretionary funding. Whether or not they can go into some sort of mandamus mode where they're going to try to compel you to do it, I don't know. There's a number of towns out there that are, there's at least a half a dozen. I got a contract to recodify Holden, And I just said, out of my innocence, I said, where are you on Section 3A MBTA? They basically said they were going to fight it. And I said, well, good luck. It's not part of my job. So I would not help, given the politics of this. I would not offer assistance to a municipality that was determined to circumvent its responsibilities.
Okay.
Don't need the money that bad. There's a case from years ago in which Hadley kept adopting the same rate of growth limitation bylaw and stopping people from developing in Hadley. And it finally came to the Supreme Judicial Court. And the usual excuses were there. They were going to study, and when they were done studying, they'd adopt a bylaw. Well, it had been 15 years, and they hadn't done a damn thing. They had neither studied nor adopted a bylaw. And not Chief Justice, but Justice Cordy, writing for the court, the unanimous court, said, when you do this, you shunt that growth over onto everybody else. All your neighbors have to take it instead of you. And that's not something consistent with the general welfare. General welfare, in other words, doesn't begin and end at the town boundary. It's a regional concept in some ways. And he basically said he wasn't going to allow it, and they nullified the bylaw.
So it sounds like there's a definite unknown factor that would happen if there is a declination by the town meeting to take any action.
I can't see why I don't see why Zuckerman isn't the case. Zuckerman did not carry with it, punitive responses by the state or denial of funding. It was just morally unfair, according to Justice Cordy. But the marker has been thrown. It might be fine for Milton, I'm just using them as the most prominent example, to say that our general welfare does not include MBTA housing. But what Justice Cordy would say, well, when you look at it in the context of Dedham, West Roxbury, Hingham, and other towns, Quincy and other towns in your area, you can't just shut the door and send it all over there.
I heard Holden was fighting it because they're not an MBTA community. They're next to an MBTA community. So I think that's why they were fighting it. That's what I heard.
I don't know. We're just starting out. So.
Yeah.
So one question that is bound to come up at town meeting relates to the map itself. This has been subject of discussion within the town. So this is the map itself, as you can see on your screen, with the half-mile radius from the train station and the overlay recommendation based upon actual street layout. With some properties, it looks like there's about 20 to 30 lots that are outside of the marked area, but are within major intersections. If that were to get reduced to just those lots that are within the half-mile radius, which is something I could envision being done at town meeting, at least proposed at town meeting. Is that something that you see that would have a material difference on whether it would get approved or not by the Attorney General?
Again, we're so early in the game. I can't answer the question with any confidence. And a lot of this has been driven by the computer modeling. So the best answer I can give you is it's easy for me to take a list of questions from the committee and send the material over to Judy Barrett. She charges less an hour than I do. And I'll ask her to just give me a very brief, bulleted response to your many questions, and she'll get back to me. and you'll have your answers. Now, she's not a lawyer, but she is the person helping the cities and towns of this in the state do this, and she's being paid by EOHLC. I mean, and she's doing it privately as well. She runs a 10, 11 person planning firm down on the South Shore in Duxbury. And I've always, I've known her 25 years. I've always considered her to be the star of the planning community.
Dan, can I ask a question?
Sure.
I wonder, I don't know that I would pick apart and second guess what the zoning board has already done with this. From our standpoint, I know we have to review it from, as we're the bylaw committee, but getting into the weeds of it, I feel like we have another board in town that has done that. So
did they use anybody as a consultant when they did?
Do we have members on the?
They did. There was a consultant that the state gave funding for.
Okay. Well, it might have been Judy Barrett for all we know.
So, yeah, I mean, and because of that, and I trust the zoning board to have, looked at the law, and I just don't know that we need to go into the weeds and question.
So some of the discussions, and again, part of this is in the purpose of going over this now, is just so we can try and address things and not have to go back to town meeting for substantive changes with recodification. And so, like an example of the changes, the submission requirements, 190.19 subsection 2, it talks about things such as how it shall be submitted on paper and things along those lines. And those are types of things that we've previously discussed are probably best off being amended. And I'm not sure if the planning board has taken any of that feedback to potentially do a floor amendment to make that so that becomes by regulation as opposed to by bylaw, just so that there's less changes that happen in the future once this issue is effectively settled as a practical matter.
Yeah, if you go online and you look at my town's upcoming 3A material, there's 31 pages of regulation. So that's not going to town meeting. And this kind of stuff that's in 119.2 submission requirements is all regulatory. It's all in a different document than what the voters will see at town meeting.
So
you could
with that, Kevin, you're on the planning board, Joe, you're on the ZBA, and I know you both each had a hand in this. Do you know if there's been any discussion to make any amendments or changes to the planning board's proposal at town meeting?
I believe there is discussion to make non-substantive changes, like what you described, Dan. And the couple that you pointed out here, if I recall, has been talked about by planning board.
Okay, and I'm specifically not having a discussion about things like the map, because that is, I consider to be a substantive change that's very material to it as opposed to the non-substantive changes.
Dan, the ZBA didn't spend too much time on this at all.
Okay.
So
it's something that I would suggest that the ZBA consider, just so at a minimum to give feedback to the planning board, where a lot of the facets that the ZBA has expertise in would then be handled by the planning board.
All right, yeah. So Greg McIntosh, who's on the ZBA, he was on this committee, so he spoke for us.
Okay.
This week.
Other comments, thoughts, feedback? Attorney McGrail.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you bring up a good point. I think there's really two components to this if it's going to be changed on the town meeting floor, either by motion or amendment. And the first is whether that procedure of changing what's being presented would be procedurally approved by the Attorney General, because that's really their main focus, as Mark said, under 48.5, when they review to make sure the procedure, notifications, publications, it was all done and met all the statutory requirements. Then there's the second component of whether those changes would affect whether the bylaw complies with 3A or not. So your example on the map, I think the map could be adjusted on town meeting floor. And procedurally, that could happen if it got smaller. So you would not be incorporating new areas that people had no idea a town meeting might happen. But if you shrank it, in my experience in doing bylaw changes, I've been involved in them where the AG has approved that because you're reducing the area. Now, in doing that, that might make the bylaw not compliant with 3A. So this is kind of a unique bylaw review by the AG. It's going to be from a procedural perspective, and then whether, if it meets all the procedural requirements, whether the net effect of those changes takes it out of compliance with 3A or not. And that gets into the modeling that Mark talked about on the land area and so forth. But the map could be reduced at town meeting procedurally, but it could take us out of compliance with 3A with that reduction.
I agree with Attorney McGrail completely.
Thank you for those comments. Other comments? Planning board article. So my suggestion for this body is that I expect that for all of the bylaw changes, we will have the ability to make recommendations to town meeting as part of discussion. It's not a mandatory component such as the finance committee or planning board has on different articles. But as a town body, we do have the ability to speak as a body if we so choose. And my recommendation is that as a body, we can make a recommendation either in favor or potentially contrary to a particular article based upon whether it's substantially is consistent with the recodification effort or not, as opposed to whether we individually like or don't like the content in it. But if there's an issue with the way that it is written, I think as a body, that would be a fair thing for us to make comment on as a body. And then every individual is welcome to give their own opinions as an individual as well. And you can identify yourself as a member of this committee. So with that, any discussion on the idea of as a committee of endorsing the article from a procedural perspective?
I think well, it depends on how you're defining procedurally. If it's the submission requirements, I think that's well within your range of expertise. But ultimately, I think in terms of changing maps, for example, I think the only thing you really can say is that we approve subject to determination by the Attorney General's office that this meets the compliance modeling process set out in Appendix B of the guidelines.
Any approval that this body would take would really just be on the style of the bylaw consistent with the recodification and the other bylaws. That's all that I could see as a body would be within our appropriate role. Anything outside of that, I don't think would be an appropriate role at this point. We could, once something is adopted, we have full jurisdiction to recommend changes or deletions or anything else. But proactively, I think for us to give an opinion, it's consistent with the goals or not, I think would be appropriate. And to give that information to the town meeting voters so they can ultimately make their own personal decision as to how to vote. I think that information could be helpful.
Yep.
So with that, do we have a motion to make a recommendation for approval in the style of the bylaw consistent with the recodification goals and components?
So moved.
Joe
Just
makes
for
the motion
discussion. Second.
and seconds. Okay, Catherine. So we've got to flip on that. Okay, great. So,
But for discussion, can I ask a question, Dan?
Sure.
Based on the motion? I mean, I agree with Attorney Bobrowski that this is really complicated. It's, the SJC has taken up the Milton case. Is there a problem? I can vote for the motion, but is there a problem with us taking no action on it because of the complexities of it? I understand basic stylistically, it's fine, but does that give the impression that we are endorsing the substance of it?
I don't know that as chair, I could address what I view as a political question more than anything else on that. I do think that it would be in the voters' best interest at town meeting to know for each of the bylaw articles themselves, which is separate from the finance articles, separate from the policy articles that will be proposed. This body has taken a look at them and finds it to either be consistent or inconsistent with style. And that I think to do consistently for all 8 of the articles that are on the agenda for tonight, I think if we say, oh, we're not going to take up this issue because it's too complex, I think actually does the town meeting a disservice when we actually report directly to the town meeting. Okay. That's my personal opinion.
No, I think that makes sense as long as we're, especially on this one, that we're so clear that it's based on the stylistic and that it satisfies what we're asked to, because there's going to be so many change motions to tweak this. So that's fine. I'm happy to vote for the motion.
Other discussions? And if members of the public would like to be a part of this discussion, you are welcome to do so. Okay, seeing none, I will call on the members in the order in which you are on the screen. It may be slightly different as my screen is a little bit different in this configuration. Joe.
Yes.
Tim.
Yes.
Catherine.
Yes.
Kevin.
Yes.
Lucy.
Yes.
Anne.
Yes.
Eric.
Okay, by me.
And I vote in the affirmative, unanimously approved. So I will, as chair, get up at town meeting in my absence. That will fall back to Anne as vice chair to just to make statement that it's in support of the bylaw as to the style and with no formal opinion of the content or size or anything along those lines. And everything obviously subject to the Attorney General's review. So it will have its caveats, but I think that the voters at town meeting will benefit from that. Okay, this brings us over to next article. On the agenda, which is a citizen petition of substantively the same topic, but it's a very different bylaw. So Attorney Bobrowski, I'm not sure if you had a chance to review this one, but
Is this the citizen petition?
is the citizen petition version. So,
I printed them all off, so I've looked at them all.
okay, so this is the citizen petition version of the overlay district. There are some substantive differences between this one and the one proposed by the planning board. So some of the changes that I noted were in how parking was handled. Site design was a bit different. The facades were handled in a different way on the corner lots. And again, they have the submission requirements that should probably be regulations as opposed to bylaw componentry.
Well, I think the safest thing for me to say is that from the perspective of this, like the planning board effort, the procedural things that you just pointed out, like the site design and the ought to be reduced to regulations, but it's not unlawful to put them in the bylaw. And as far as recodification goes, I can work with this as much as I can work with the planning board bylaw, and I'll find a home for it with only minor renumbering if and when the time comes.
Okay. Very helpful. Other thoughts? The map is notably different. Note that it's just different in how it's configured. Whether this conforms or not, I'm not recommending we make any opinion whatsoever.
Dan, do we know what citizen put this forth?
The citizen would be Ed Dombrowski.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure of that. Okay.
Yep. Second signature.
Got it.
Well, he did have the right to do this as a town councilor and elected board member. He chose to do it through the citizen petition.
Correct.
Any discussion on this item? Otherwise, I recommend we make the same motion that, again, this will be substantively consistent with the recodification should it get adopted. And again, recommendations for moving regulatory items out of the bylaw and so forth. It should that be chosen, although I don't think that is an item for a motion, but I think the motion is that this is substantively consistent with the recodification effort, and we're not seeing anything that is glaring for it without, again, taking opinion on the content substantively either way. Do we have a motion to make a recommendation that is consistent with the recodification effort?
So moved.
Tim makes the motion this time, Catherine. And who wants to second?
I can second.
Catherine seconds. Okay. Any discussion on this bylaw? Okay, with that, and again, I would recommend the similar changes from a procedural perspective, that anything that's really regulatory in nature be pulled out, but that's a recommendation, not a part of the motion itself. So with that, we'll take a vote in the order in which you appear on my screen. Joe?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes.
Catherine?
Yep.
Kevin?
Yes.
Lucy?
Yes.
Anne?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
And I vote in the affirmative as well. Okay, so these are both approved from a procedural perspective. This brings us over to the third, which is the self-storage overlay. Mr. McRae, this might look familiar to you. I believe you'll be presenting this one.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So again, Attorney Bobrowski, same question is going to go to you from a recodification and consistency perspective. If there's anything in here that seems inconsistent in a meaningful way, by all means, please let us know. If it seems that, okay, there's nothing here that's significant, then, you know, we can probably go again with a motion that we approve it from a process perspective. We're not finding significant inconsistencies.
Yeah, I think I can easily renumber it to join the other overlay districts in section 9. I don't know that I would put if it's an overlay district, you generally don't see itemized entries in the generic use table, because generally overlay districts are not a part of the use table. They sit on top of the underlying use districts, and it gets confusing because underneath you might have a yes, and in the overlay district you might have a no. That particularly happens a lot with things like groundwater protection or floodplain overlay districts. It's a clear path to a yes in the underlying district, but if you're in a wet area, the answer sometimes is no or special permit. So you can't have one say yes and the other one say no. So the number 6, for example, I don't know that you need to do that. I can put those regulations in the the only district in which this is really going to be allowed is B and the overlay. Well, there's a couple of yeses, LI and I, sorry. So it's another way of me saying the same question I think I asked Attorney McGrail last time. Why overlay? Why not just put an entry in the use table? And he had a good answer, but I have to confess I don't remember it.
If I may, Mr. Chair?
Yep.
Yeah. So Mark, the self-storage facility is allowed by special permit. So we define self-storage facility, which is not currently defined.
Right.
And now it's allowed by special permit in the business district. Allowed is a yes by right in the limited industrial and industrial districts. And then also by special permit in the self-storage facility overlay district. And the district that's being proposed right now is outside of those districts where it's allowed.
And what is the district? So what is the district that it's, I see the map.
A limited business district.
It's
So
currently limited business.
That property of the map, the underlying
Oh,
district.
I see.
Yeah, that's limited business.
Yeah, and it's not the entire limited business district.
No.
And you don't want to open the door in the rest of the limited.
That was the discussion with, the planning board, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. How big is the parcel?
It's approximately, I think, 4.5 acres, Mark.
I don't worry so much about spot zoning anymore. Ever since Judge Foster handed me my hat in the Cambridge case 10 years ago. So the 4.5 acres doesn't bother me. The fact that it's being singled out for different treatment than other properties in a limited business district doesn't bother me, as long as it's for a valid public purpose. And I'm sure, self-storage is a valid public purpose. So spot zoning has really almost disappeared from our zoning landscape here. So with that said, I think, is it allowed everywhere in the B by special permit,
Yes.
LI by as of right, and I by right?
Yes.
Okay. So really you're only adding the limited business district. This parcel in the limited business district.
Yeah, and right now, Mark, and you had picked up on this, that in our current bylaw, and that's why this, I think, is consistent with what the draft bylaw that is being proposed by the bylaw committee, because you actually came up with a definition for self-storage facility.
Yeah,
I modeled this after because we don't have that. So the building inspectors, past and present, deem that to be a warehouse use, which
yeah,
is allowed by, I matched, it's allowed in that's allowed in the business district by special permit, in the limited industrial district and industrial district as a yes.
well, the problem with calling it a warehouse is that, generally you need one parking space per 1,000.
Exactly, yeah.
And so you might have 80,000 square feet and 80 parking spaces required.
Yeah, that's why we put a specific parking requirement here, much lower.
So why can't we just eliminate number 6 and put these? I don't want to start adding overlay districts to the use table. It's my opinion that they don't belong in the use table.
Yeah, the only reason I did that is that's the way they are now. So I mean, I have no problem that, the difficulty with these things is that since we're amending the bylaw as it exists today, prior to recodification.
Yeah, right.
I've got to base it on the way it is today for consistency
Yeah.
purposes.
Yeah, and one of my recommendations is actually to take the assisted overlay district out.
Yeah.
And go to senior housing as a model instead.
So I would be,
for today's purposes, then I don't have an issue, but I mean, my druthers would be that when the recodification is done, we can have a self-storage facility overlay district, but it won't be in the use table, and it'll just say that the self-storage facility overlay district is superimposed over parcel XYZ, which is currently located in the limited business district, and here are the rules.
yeah,
That
would after the
that would
fact.
be consistent with the recodification.
Yeah.
But I don't think we need to do it at this town meeting.
Very helpful. Just so that would you, that probably does not apply to the MBTA components, although because those also have the table of use regulations as well.
Yeah, but they don't go in the main table of use regulations.
No, they are going in there. That's the way
They are going in there.
Well, let me look back at the MBT. I think I put it away over here somewhere.
Section 4 would be on page 5 of the planning board's version.
Yeah, see, overlay districts should not go in the use table. You're just creating mass confusion. Because where they are superimposed on underlying zoning districts, there's logically going to be a no in the underlying and a yes in the overlay, or vice versa. And now you've got to go through all kinds of anguish to try to figure out what the underlying district is, what the underlying district says about the particular use. And then you've got to be careful to draft the language of the overlay district to properly supersede the underlying district.
Am I correct that what you're saying is that even for the MBTA communities overlay district, as part of recodification, provided that one of these, at least one of these gets approved, that you, as part of recodification, you would recommend that we remove them from the use table itself as part of the recodification project after the fact?
Yeah, I mean, Dan, I've made that recommendation to anybody who's trying to sneak an overlay district into any use table for 38 years. So
Okay.
I don't, just because this is really special stuff doesn't mean I'm going to think differently about it. I think it's too confusing. And especially, when you get into things like the zoning map, it even gets worse. You've got underlying districts shown in solid colors, and now you've got hatched areas and dotted areas. They're all the overlay districts, and some may be triply situated. So you've got an underlying district with an MBTA district, with a floodplain district, God forbid, with a water resource protection district. And those maps should be in the overlay district section to keep it clear.
We have a lot of those maps now, and we've got.
You do. I found the page online. It's
Yeah.
great.
We've got the sign overlay district, the mixed use overlay district, the municipal building overlay district. We've got new sign district. So we have so that's why I think the MBTA was done this way. And that's why I did this self-storage, to be consistent to the way it is now. I don't have an issue after the fact, if these even pass town meeting, that we clean them all up, because that's going to happen anyways.
Yeah, just so we're all on the with a clear understanding that my fight down the road in a year is going to be to pull these tables out of the real use table in section 3 and make either narrative references or a brief table in section 9.5 or 9.6 or 9.7.
How do you deal with it though, Mark, if some of these uses are allowed in some of the underlying districts, and then there's a special overlay district where they're also allowed? How do you deal with that by pulling that out of the table? Because now it's not just an overlay district, because the use is allowed as an underlying use in some other districts.
Well, if the question is going to be more about density than it is probably about use. So you might have, a 3-unit building allowed in the pick a district, GR or MR. And if it were also part of the MBTA overlay district, the density wouldn't be stuck on 3, it would be 15. So, typically what I say, it depends on the context of an overlay district, but I like what 40R has been routinized since 05, 06. And there's a model bylaw that everybody drafting a 40R district uses. It's one of those things you can change online, and they want to see the track changes you're making to it, because they develop the model so that they don't want you wandering too far. But what it basically says is that the uses in the underlying district remain available. But if the applicant chooses to go 40R, then the underlying district disappears and the 40R rules will control. And I think that's the same thing you'd be saying for MBTA. You've got a section up front in the underlying zoning 1141. The MBTA is an overlay district superimposed. The regulations governing the underlying districts remain in full force, except for uses allowed as of right in the MCMOD. I think the proper way to say that would be, except where the applicant chooses to proceed under the provisions of the MCMOD. I can send you the 40R paragraph, because I just did it in Grafton and I did it a year ago in North Attleboro. And that's really what you want to say. This kind of says that, but I think you might want to be a little bit more precise. That's all.
If you can send recommendations for those language changes, that would be really helpful. And we'll leave it to the planning board, which is sponsoring the article, which changes they want to bring to the town meeting floor.
Yeah, I'll send it to you right now and to the committee as well.
Thank you. Okay, so with that, I'm going to make the same motion where this seems to be consistent with recodification for self-storage. And then there will be a follow-up cleanup of the section. And I think letting the town meeting know that those changes may come down in the future, that the use table is planned to get changed and simplified. I think that would be, again, helpful just as part of discussion if it becomes relevant for the discussion that happens on any of these particular topics. And at this point, it's too early to determine what the tenor of the discussions is going to be at town meeting. So with that, do we have a motion to recommend that this is consistent with the recodification efforts and there's not any major conflicts with the recodification?
So moved.
So Anne is making the motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Lucy seconds. We're making sure that everyone is getting involved. Any further discussion? Now we're going to make sure everyone gets involved. So we'll take a vote in favor or declination of the motion itself. Joe?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes.
Catherine? We didn't quite hear you.
Yes.
Thank you. Kevin?
Yes.
Lucy?
Yes.
Anne?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
And I vote in the affirmative. So there's again unanimous approval. Okay, this brings us to the last of the zoning specific articles. This one's a little bit of a different style. Attorney Bobrowski, I'm not sure if you've had a chance to review this one in depth. This is 190, a change to marijuana zoning. It's to create a overlay district for marijuana cultivation or marijuana cultivation and sale.
I don't see why that wouldn't be. I've seen many, so I can tell you that, assuming it complies with the state regulations on point in terms of terminology and treatment of the use, that's pretty common to see these days.
So a couple of things that we've already noted. One is that it adds a lot of things to the use table, but which are not currently in the use table itself.
Mm-hmm.
So, but again, that would be consistent with the way of not having of the recodification. The other difference, there are some other differences in here, one of which is potentially significant. I don't know what the significance of it is. It has to do with the location requirements, which is different in how it's measured from all of the existing and proposed recodification measurement systems. This is a completely different way of measuring. And I don't know if that would introduce confusion or not. So the current and the recodification is point to point from edge of the property. This is from the center of properties and going around impassable barriers.
That was recently amended by the attorney, and the attorney general caught me in Irving. Let me send you this thing I'm about to send you, and then I'll go get the letter from the attorney general. Hang on. You got me going in 5 directions here.
We're doing well if it's only 5.
Right. I'm just going to send it to you, Mr. Chairman, and then you can forward it on to people.
Okay, thank you.
Now let me go find my nasty letter from the AG's office. So
that was one of the issues that was identified. Another one of the issues that was identified is the list of prohibited nearby uses.
Yeah, it looks like, do you see Kevin's hand is up? I don't know if you missed that.
Thank you. Kevin?
Dan, just so you know, the planning board discussed the measurement with this petitioner Tuesday at our meeting and asked that they bring it in line with how our bylaws currently read. So that is a change that they said they would be making before bringing it to town meeting.
Okay. And then I'm looking here. I know there's a discussion about schools and children.
So there are generally hard and fast requirements in RMDs, which are medical. But there are no hard and fast requirements with regard to adult or recreational use. I had a case in Haverhill for the city where they adopted marijuana. There were 2 or 3 different marijuana uses. It was retail. It might have been social consumption. It wasn't grow. I don't think it was manufacturing and processing, but there was no buffer to a public park or to anything like that. And a disgruntled neighbor of a marijuana shop claimed it was a violation. And this went to the appeals court, and the appeals court said, nah, the city had good reasons to do what they did because they were trying to bring people into the downtown, and anything that discouraged people coming into the downtown would be, contradictory to what the goal of the zoning in Haverhill was trying to do: bring people downtown.
Okay, this is the section, and your opinion here, and this may be the definitions that would be needed. It's 2A. It shall be located within 500 feet of a pre-existing public or private school providing education. And it shall be located, it contains a pre-existing daycare center. And what isn't clear there is, does that require it to be a licensed school, as in like a K to, a fully licensed school? And the reason why I'm asking that is one of the areas in here, and Mr. Attorney McCarthy, I see you here, and I'll call on you in a moment. There is a music school that is nearby, but that is not a licensed school, but it does service young children and advertises for that. So I wasn't sure if this type of language is limited to the uses that would be covered by the Department of Education.
Yeah, I'll let Attorney McCarthy answer that, but I'm thinking, Dan, it would just be like dealing drugs in a school zone. The music school may not count. There's a statutory definition of the schools that can be allowed, or how to define them, but I'm sure Mike knows better than I.
So, Attorney McCarthy?
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everybody. So a couple of things. First, no, I don't think it would apply to a music school that had young students among the population, particularly where it's kind of a part-time thing. It's a school lesson type establishment. But importantly, what I want to note, Mr. Chairman, is that the definition that you're looking at in the draft bylaw, there was discussion at the planning board and agreement to modify by friendly amendment, and that's subject to vote at town meeting, as is everything else, to adopt your bylaw. Well, I shouldn't call it your bylaw, but to adopt the 500-foot definition proposed or discussed in the bylaw review committee's draft bylaw. I don't have it in front of me. I think it was like section 7.6.4, but I just wanted to make sure that you were aware that that's going to be proposed at town meeting, that the 500-foot definition. So essentially, well, among other variations, and it's your, it's more your draft than mine, obviously, but that 500-foot, the impenetrable or impassable barrier wording would be eliminated.
Okay. And to your point, Kevin York, who's also a member of the planning board, did mention that. So much appreciated.
Okay, I just signed on.
Yeah. So Attorney Bobrowski is our zoning consultant, and any opinions that you have on that, since this is your
could you read me the distance section again?
So what my understanding is from Attorney McCarthy is that they're going to go with the language that's in the draft 1 form of the recodification for measuring of distances instead of what's currently in this proposal, so that it's more consistent.
And what does the proposal read? Go ahead.
It's currently on page 9, section 2A. So the idea is to have a floor amendment by the proponent to change that definition.
Okay, so this is effective October 27th of last year. The Cannabis Control Commission changed its regulations. I'll give you the site. It's 935 CMR 500.110 parentheses 3. And they now say the buffer zone distance of 500 feet shall be measured in a straight line from the geometric center of the marijuana establishment entrance to the geometric center of the nearest school entrance, unless there is an impossible barrier within those 500 feet. In these cases, the buffer zone distance shall be measured along the center of the shortest publicly accessible pedestrian travel path from the geometric center of the marijuana establishment entrance to the geometric center of the nearest school entrance.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. This is Mike McCarthy. That's what I used in the in our proposed bylaw.
Good.
Yep.
I did not know that, and they caught me, and they changed what I put in the small towns bylaw. So
yeah, no, that's what I had. We did, though, as was just being discussed, we had some meetings with the planning board, and they preferred out a different, I think, and I don't want to speak for them, but there was discussion and there was agreement that we would modify that section of the draft bylaw to adopt the 500-foot wording in the draft bylaw from this town bylaw review committee. That draft, as I recall, was dated December 31st. And I think it's like section 7 point, it's in the recreational section, and it was that 500-foot definition there. Now, as a proponent, we're good with either definition, and that's what I said to the planning board. If the proposed definition is better, in your opinion, and the bylaw committee is in agreement with you, then I'll go back to the planning board and let them know that that's the position of the bylaw review committee, and have a discussion with them about it. But right now, there is, the plan is to offer a friendly amendment to the draft bylaw at town meeting to adopt the bylaw review committee's proposed definition.
okay, I'm just warning you that they disapproved. I'm reading from the Attorney General's review letter. We disapproved the text above in bold and underline establishing the manner of measuring the buffer zone because it conflicts with the updated CCC regs that I just read that requires the buffer zone to be measured, blah, blah, blah. Towns are prohibited from imposing restrictions that conflict with the CCC regulations, cites to a Mansfield case.
Well, I might have to back to the planning board and discuss that with them then. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. You know what I'll do is I'll just make a copy of this language and I'll send it to Dan, and Dan's going to be doing a lot of work when he gets home. without me bothering him with all these emails. So here we go, Dan. Here's number 2.
Okay. So it sounds like the recommendation is now to go with the updated language as currently specified here, due to effectively recent developments.
Yeah, I mean,
so one of the other questions is that in the proposed draft 1 of the bylaw, there is instead of doing an overlay district, there is a permissible use of marijuana sales and so forth in the overall recodification proposal. Is this consistent with the recodification as you've drafted it?
Assuming that it complies with the Attorney General's ruling, as I just sent it to you in an email, it's a simple matter for me to recodify it. My personal point of view after getting my wrist slapped here by the AG's office is that you better do it the way they want you to do it, or they're going to slap your wrist too.
Well, and part of the question is, will this then replace what you have, or reduce the need for what you have in the draft bylaw to have a marijuana uses? So this would satisfy those needs.
Yeah,
because this is actually, I think, in some ways more restrictive than what you have in the draft.
Yeah. Well, that's at mine's just a draft. So to the extent that the town wants to do something, I'll recodify that. I guess that's my ultimate answer.
Okay.
As long as it's consistent with what the AG said.
So what I'm hearing is that this would change the recodification. It certainly can be done, but it would change what would happen with recodification to potentially further limit where marijuana, where these establishments could happen. It would require another change to a map or otherwise, as opposed to making it a by right in certain districts, which was the current draft proposal.
Yep. Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
Like I said, if the town is operating within the boundaries of the CMRs, then I'm just your humble scrivener.
You're always more than our humble scrivener.
Mark, it's Mike McCarthy again. I would just add a little bit of more color there. The draft bylaw allows, with a special permit, as you know, the recreationally the adult use in an industrial district, any industrial district. This overlay includes property which is within the industrial district of the town, and only within the industrial district of the town. To the extent that's germane to your thinking on the matter, I offer that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so with that, and one of the other discussions, Attorney McCarthy, but before you joined, is that as part of recodification, the general recommendation is to get rid of all overlay districts from the use table directly, because of the increased confusion that it creates, especially where we have a lot of overlay districts. So this entire section would be removed as part of recodification, but that does not impact the recommendation for what we have now.
Understood. Thank you for that information.
Any other comments, concerns, questions? Okay, with that, I'm going to make a motion that this is, again, consistent with the recodification. Unlike the three prior zoning articles we discussed, this will change the proposal for recodification, but it is more limiting. But that does not make it inconsistent with the recodification project itself. That's the way that I'm viewing this. So with that, I'm going to make a motion that as a committee, we make a statement to that effect that this is consistent and that it is more limiting than has otherwise been discussed. So obviously, we can't say what would ultimately be proposed because we had not gotten into further discussion of it, but it is more limiting than what has been discussed thus far. So do we have a motion for a statement to the effect that this is consistent with recodification and is more limiting than what has been discussed in the current drafts?
So moved.
And makes the motion. Let's see, who has not done a second so far? Eric, I don't think you've done a second so far. Would you like to second this one? You're on mute if you want to take action on it. I'm not seeing any movement by Eric. Anyone else?
I'll second it, Tim.
Okay, Tim is seconding the motion. Any further discussion on the motion before you? With that, we will take a roll call vote in the order in which you are on my screen, and it's shifted slightly just with the way people have been coming and going in the meeting. So Joe, you're still first.
Yes.
Tim.
Yes.
Catherine.
Yes.
Kevin.
Yes.
Anne.
Yes.
Eric. And I'm not sure if we've lost Eric by voice. I'll come back to him. Lucy.
Yes.
Okay, Eric, if you want to submit a vote, otherwise it'll be an abstention on this one. I vote in the affirmative as well. So with that, we've got 7 in favor and 1 abstention. Just due to the fact that we can't hear Eric at the moment. So he has contributed, so he's still present for the purpose of quorum and other purposes. Okay. Zoning articles are done. We now, for the town meeting, we now have a couple of other general bylaws. And thank you, Attorney McCarthy, for your assistance on this. The first one that we will actually take up is related to this, and that's the general bylaw for marijuana. Similar topic. And this is a very simple bylaw. Attorney Bobrowski, since you do this type of law, your opinions on this are also really helpful. This actually is just trying to delete the entirety of the section on this bylaw overall, which is removing the entirety of the bylaw itself. Now, I'm going to stop sharing for a quick moment, bring up the reference bylaw. So the purpose of this is to remove the bylaw that was added in 2017. Which currently is a prohibition on marijuana establishments. The town itself did vote against the allowance of it. So my understanding is that the town could have a prohibition if it so chose, but there's nothing that says that it cannot change course and remove that prohibition. That's my understanding, but I'm not a lawyer in this particular area.
My understanding is that, well, I usually come in after the municipality has cleared the path to do what they want to do. But I think if you were a no vote in the referendum and now you want to switch that, I believe that there has to be another referendum, but I'm not sure. So just hang on while I look it up. And I mean, I'm sure Tom has weighed in on this. What is Tom saying?
He has not weighed in on this as of now.
Okay, this is kind of general town council stuff that I don't. If I wanted to be town council, I had many opportunities. I don't. But I don't. One day about 25 years ago, my associate, who was acting as town council in a small town, told me he couldn't do anything for me that morning because he had an emergency. And I said, "What is it?" And he said, "The employees' lunchroom refrigerator busted, and I've got to check the warranty out." And I was like, "Okay, you go right ahead." I vowed then I would never serve as town council, general town council. So I'm looking up my marijuana.
So one question that I do have, since this one is related and I don't know timing wise where these will occur, is if the marijuana establishments are still forbidden, if this does not pass, would it then be enforced and make the zoning piece effectively moot?
If I'm right,
I didn't think we were allowed to forbid marijuana establishments. I thought the state had spoken on that with another municipality.
that was the RMD piece of it. The RMD being
medical.
That's the medical dispensaries.
That was around 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And then this one was done after Wakefield, which was the test case, failed.
Yes, Wakefield was one of there were two towns.
Yeah.
You and Burlington, I think. All right.
And Attorney McCarthy, if you're still with us, if you have any knowledge in this area, since I know you're working with the proponents for the other zoning article, your input here is certainly encouraged as well.
I am still here. Sorry about that. I had to mute something. While Mark is doing his research, in general, I believe that the general bylaw that we're now discussing was put into effect, obviously to prohibit all marijuana. I think the consensus at the time was that there was a requirement, at one point there was a requirement, as Mark just alluded to, that the registered marijuana dispensaries, you couldn't prohibit them per se, but you could have a general bylaw that prohibited all facilities. So right now, those two are inconsistent, as you just posited, going forward as to whether it would moot the recreational option that's proposed. I would submit to you that would be no more inconsistent in the future as it would be now, in terms of prohibiting it and at the same time having a bylaw that allows it. So it'd be kind of on that same line of logic. But anyway, I just wanted to add that kind of historical context from my own recollection.
I appreciate that. And what one hand giveth, the other hand tend to taketh away. Not inconsistent within the town, within the municipal government.
Right.
You can bring it in the front door. It may not go out the back door.
I understand.
Do you know if this is your proponent a part of this particular attorney McCarthy, part of this particular bylaw petition as well?
Yes.
Or is this okay?
Well, the principals of the entity that own the land are not Wakefield residents, but the Wakefield residents. As part of the proponents. So, yep.
Okay.
Well, it's too late for me to call my partner. He knows the answer.
Okay. If you can, when you do get that answer, if you can send it along, I can then send it to the committee itself.
All right, we'll do.
If it requires a referendum, and I will also, Attorney McCarthy, if you send your contact information, I can also send that information to you as well.
I would appreciate that, and I will do that. I appreciate it.
Because the goal here is to not have surprises on the floor of town meeting when they're
Sure.
avoidable.
Right.
That's part of the reason for
100%.
having this discussion. Having a solid debate at town meeting, fantastic. Surprises, no one tends to win.
No, wasting time doing something that you're not even allowed to do is a real bother. So I will call, Jonathan speaks at the Attorney General's conferences on cannabis regulation, so I'm sure he knows the answer.
Okay, so next one, which I know is going to be somewhat similar. This is one, not sure if you'll have an opinion on this, Attorney Bobrowski, but you're certainly welcome to do. So do one very simple. It's to add a very simple section to the bylaws that would have the town offer trash removal and recycling to all residential properties. Right now, it is only for 4 or less. Anything that has more than 4 units has to have its own separate trash and recycling. So this would include that the town would be responsible for, I would presume, Audubon Road, which has about 160 apartment units, as well as all other larger types of communities. So there's certainly, without getting into the reasons behind it, a lot of it has to do with equitability of services and taxation and things along those lines. Wasn't sure if there was an opinion on the language itself.
Not on my end. I thought it was certainly.
And Attorney Mullen did mention that he helped just to do the phrasing of the language, but did not take an opinion on the content itself. He did that at the directive of the town administrator.
Going back to my bailiwick, this would certainly have no impact on the recodification effort.
For the members of the committee, thoughts on this? This would certainly have a financial impact on the cost of it would have a significant financial impact on the DPW budgets. I'm not sure of impacts, operational impacts besides the financial componentry of it. Next one is a more interesting style. This one has to do with use of flagpoles. So this is one that again came by citizen petition. And what it does is it limits the flags to only be the American flag and the POW MIA, and it only allows for the reduction of flagpole when ordered due to the death of a public officer or military veteran. So it's very specific as to what it allows and what it doesn't allow. State flag is allowed, with the one exception of General Galvin at the middle school. Any thoughts? Not sure where the language for this one came from offhand. Not as concerned. The language doesn't talk about the specific edition of where this would be in the bylaws itself. So that may be something that would get handled as part of potential enrobing language and so forth that Attorney Mullen may do, or he may just leave it as is. I don't know what he's been asked to do by town council.
I would think it would be a general bylaw.
So the proposal is to make this a general bylaw as opposed to a policy. Right now, there is a policy in place that is different than the way this is set up. The current policy allows for the town council, CIL, to allow flags at their discretion upon a positive vote. And this would remove that discretion. So that's the background behind it.
This is like to prevent people flying a pride flag.
Correct.
Yeah. So the question is, what do we do with this?
If we want to take an opinion on it, we can, since this would be something that is a general bylaw, we can choose to take an opinion. Unlike the zoning, which is part of a bigger project, I don't think we need to necessarily have opinions on the general bylaws, although we can. So the prior two general bylaws for multifamily trash, and we talked about the cannabis, they're not inherently, unless there's an inconsistency with the referendum, there's not a issue that affects the bylaw review directly. We're not recommending it. We're not counter recommending those issues. This one, if we wish to take an opinion on, we certainly can. But and part of the reason I'm mentioning that is this is a different topic that is not currently addressed. Those issues are currently addressed as bylaws. This is not. So this is a new topic for it. That would be a new bylaw in its entirety. So Attorney Bobrowski, if you've got any thoughts on it,
Nope.
certainly welcome to.
I'm staying out of this one.
So my suggestion is that this is because the flagpoles themselves are on property that is actually managed by the town council, CIL. I recommend that this not be a legislated item. It also potentially raises other limitations and First Amendment issues as well. There are possible statements of affirmation or not by the town, but really, as I view it, this is an issue that is not something that I would recommend that the town legislate as a new bylaw that then has to be managed and go through the town council, the town meeting process for amendment. So that's my personal thoughts on it. Whether we should take a stand on it, I defer to the committee. Others' thoughts?
I think your approach or your thoughts make sense, or I'm generally aligned with that.
I don't think we should take a stand on this one. Absolutely not.
Eric, did you want to speak on this?
I think the Human Relations Commission sometimes wants to illustrate a particular issue at a particular time, and showing a flag is one way of doing it, and I think it's done this in the past. So this is a form of, I don't want to use the word censorship, but I just used it.
Okay. Others? Kevin, Catherine, Tim, Joe?
I don't think we should.
The town. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't think we should take any stand on this.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree. Just let the town vote. That's why it's there.
Catherine, your thoughts on this?
I think it makes sense to let the town vote on this and not take a stand.
Well, the town, and I will state, the town will take a vote one way or the other. It's a matter of whether we make a recommendation. I have no problems not making a recommendation on it one way or the other. I just do find it to be a bit inconsistent with the other bylaws that we do have. So we'll state that piece for it. So I get the sentiment of making sure that we always have prioritization of the American flag. It's a matter of whether there's the exclusivity or not. And the framing of it is something that I see coming back to us if this is approved for potential changes, particularly for things such as where the way that it is specifically has limitations as to when it can be at half staff. So there are other reasons why things can be at half staff. It doesn't necessarily have to be for death of a public officer or military veteran. There are some other reasons why flags have been at half staff, and this would not actually permit that within the town without being a violation of the bylaw. So there's some other things, but I have no problems letting this one go without comment as a board itself. Okay, and the last one we have. This is the type of thing that I'm fully confident, Attorney Bobrowski, you wanted to stay away from. And this is the minutia of town meeting, the town council gets to deal with. And this has to do with water and sewer billing.
Yeah, I gotta go because the employee's refrigerator's warranty has been violated.
So this does not seem to be a bylaw in and of itself, but it was framed as one. Because it's a really a request to reassess the policies, the way that the petition itself states. My recommendation on it, again, I want to make sure that as a committee, we're all aware of everything that was positioned as a bylaw. There are two other articles that I'm aware of for town meeting that are not bylaws by any means. They are public policy statements clearly and are framed as such. But this one was framed potentially as a bylaw. My recommendation is we take no action on this one either. Any thoughts on it?
I like that.
I think we leave this one to the sewers. Okay, with that, we have few minutes before 9 o'clock. We could get into the definitions of the recodification draft 1, or we can call it an evening and we have our next meeting set up for April 16th. So preferences.
I'll make it easy for you, Mr. Chairman. Yesterday, I spent 9 hours in the St. Kitts airport waiting for my American flight to come back to Miami. It did not do so until 2:30 this morning, and I did not check into the hotel in Miami until 10 of 3, and then I caught an 8:30 flight home. So I am at the end of the rope here. If you'll give me a break, I think everybody else could probably use one too.
I think that seems as good a reason as any to continue on. We'll defer item 5 till April 16th. I don't anticipate that there will be any other significant items for town meeting, but I'm glad that we've had a chance to review those items at this particular meeting.
Can I suggest that in addition to the definitions, we do the performance standards that we've been talking about now, treating like a sushi menu. So if you could urge your members to get me, just print out those pages and, make a check next to it if you think it's a good idea, and make an X next to it if you don't think it's a good idea. And then I'll collate that and we'll see where we are on the next meeting date, which I believe is the 18th.
Next meeting is the 16th.
16th, sorry.
Tuesday, April 16th, 7 p.m.
Yeah, I have that in my book.
Any questions as to what the request is from Attorney Bobrowski? And people can send that feedback. The members can send that feedback directly to Attorney Bobrowski. He can assemble it and then bring it to us for that meeting. So if you can take a look at the performance standards, those are also available on the website for anyone who's watching and wants to look at this information. All of the recodification information is available on the Bylaw Review Committee website. So with that, we've got several upcoming holidays. We've got Laylat al-Qadr, which is coming up on April 5th, National Tartan Day on April 6th, National Library Workers Day on April 9th. The day before, of course, is the eclipse. While we're speaking about the eclipse and National Library Workers Day, the library does have some eclipse glasses available. So if you are planning on looking at the eclipse, please don't look at it without glasses. Highly recommend go to the library first. Eid al-Fitr is on April 10th. Thomas Jefferson's birthday is April 13th. And the holiday only known in Massachusetts and Maine, which used to be part of Massachusetts, Patriots Day, is on April 15th. What is not actually listed is on April 16th itself is a holiday that is not celebrated in Massachusetts, but does affect us, and that's Evacuation Day. That is April 16th. The reason why that's so significant is that is actually celebrated in Washington, D.C. The reason why it's significant is it means that taxes are not due on April 15th because of Patriots Day. They're not due on the 16th because the IRS headquarters office is closed. So taxes are actually due on April 17th. So little interesting factoid for you. If you were wondering when taxes were, they're not due on Monday, they're due on Wednesday, the 17th, and that's the reason why. So your other fact, if you have not started working on your taxes, you've got a 48-hour reprieve. Please keep in mind, you can file for an extension. You cannot file for the extensions do not apply to the payments. Payments are due as needed. All the governmental authorities do depend upon getting the funds in on time. If you don't submit it, you can always submit it later. Just know there will be penalties and interest, and the taxing authorities tend to be very good about getting those. So with that, any other items before we have a motion to adjourn? Okay, with that, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Anne makes the motion. Who wants the second? And Eric is doing the second for adjourning. So we'll take that as a second, Eric. Thank you. And with that, we will take the votes in the order in which you appear on my screen. Joe?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes.
Catherine? That's a yes. Eric?
Yes.
Lucy?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Anne?
Yes.
And I will join you in the affirmative. We have a unanimous vote for adjourning. Meeting's adjourned at 8:54. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you 2 weeks from tomorrow. Please make sure if you have any last minute April Fool's jokes, you get to play them in the next few hours before April Fool's goes away for another year. Fortunately, you only have to wait 365 days, not 366 for next year's April Fool's. So enjoy. Thank you very much. Appreciate everyone's input. Very, very helpful. Have a good night.
night, all.